How did we begin? Where was the origin of civilization? Experts have offered many theories based on what they observe, but do we really know? For sometimes evidence turns up which completely contradicts all theories. In the frozen earth of Siberia, remains are found of lost animal species such as the giant mammoth, wiped out by a sudden global cataclysm. Ancient maps have been discovered which show the continent of Antarctica centuries before we discovered it.
This map, which is centuries old, depicts the true configuration of Queen Maud's Land, which is now under nearly a kilometer of ice, and its true configuration wasn't determined until 1949.
A century ago, an archaeologist concluded the ancient city of Tiwanaku in Bolivia was a stellar observatory, aligned to the sun and stars. From it, he calculated its age to be 17,000 years old. His evidence was ridiculed until recently.
The only correction that I would make is that we now have better astronomical measurements due to satellites and computers. And I would suspect the date would be more like 12,000 years ago. But that still makes Tiwanaku the oldest city known on the face of the earth.
Geologists found that the Great Sphinx of Egypt has been weathered by centuries of incessant heavy rain. Such rain can only have occurred thousands of years before the pharaohs. Was the Sphinx built way before the dawn of civilization?
What's at issue here is the entire history of civilization. It may not have gone in a straight line from stupid old cavemen to smart old us with our hydrogen bombs and our striped toothpaste.
Sometimes evidence is found which breaks all the rules. In this program, we'll meet people who are looking at precisely this evidence and chart new theories which may change our views on the course of human civilization.
This huge face was carved by the ancient Olmecs of Mexico. It's believed to be at least 2,000 years old. It's quite unmistakably African, and yet Negroes are not supposed to have come to America until after the time of Columbus.
In his book From Atlantis to the Sphinx, author Colin Wilson collects clues which he and others believe to reveal footprints of a lost, advanced civilization that existed before history began. Greek philosopher Plato described precisely such a civilization, which, Egyptian priests told him, sailed the oceans thousands of years earlier until it was destroyed in a huge cataclysm. He called it Atlantis. Atlantis. A huge cataclysm. We know of such a cataclysm from another myth, the biblical flood, Noah and his ark, a myth equally scorned by scientists.
Yet, when they reject the biblical deluge and Noah's Ark as fable, scientists are ignoring the fact that across the entire world there are hundreds of flood myths, quite apart from the Mesopotamian and the Hebrew accounts, which tell the same story of a worldwide disaster which virtually wiped out mankind before the beginning of recorded history. Was there really something like a flood? And if so, was there a civilization that came before all the others? I'm saying a civilization and not Atlantis, because as soon as you mention that word Atlantis, every scientist groans, "Oh no," and stops listening. The notion of a universal flood is beyond intellectual respectability. But how unbiased is science itself? Does it really do what it claims to do? Take the facts and start from there.
Throughout history, science has tended to focus more on its own theories than on the facts. From facts, a theory arises to explain them. Other facts are laid aside. New facts may change the theory, but as often they're again ignored. We call such facts anomalies, evidence which doesn't fit. In their controversial book, Forbidden Archaeology, scientists Thompson and Cremo show what happens to such evidence which contradicts the rules.
Over the past 150 years, these archaeologists and anthropologists have covered up as much evidence as they've dug up, literally.
Basically what you find is something we call a knowledge filter. This is a fundamental feature of science, of human nature. People tend to filter out things that don't fit. So in science you find that evidence that doesn't fit the accepted paradigm tends to be eliminated. It's not taught, it's not discussed, and people who are educated in scientific teachings generally don't even learn about it.
What we're talking about, for example, was demonstrated in Hiatlico, Mexico, in 1966, when archaeologist Jean Steen McIntyre threatened to overturn the conventional view that mankind is relatively new to most parts of the Earth. That he penetrated into Siberia around about 30,000 years ago, and definitely not into America until about 20,000 years ago.
In Mexico, Jean Steen McIntyre uncovered stone tools and human bones and had them dated through a variety of thorough scientific tests.
We thought we had an old site. This was back in '66, and we thought it was perhaps 20,000 years old, and at that time that was considered a very old age for the site. When we finally got the dates and all the different methods we used to date it, it came out to be 250,000 years old. To tell you the truth, I would have been happy with a 20,000-year-old date. It would have made my career. And I was rather naive. I thought, okay, I'm just going to stick with the date. We've got the information, we got the facts, let's get the facts out and go on from there. And I didn't realize it was going to ruin my whole career.
All her professional opportunities have been closed off since then. The site was closed, permission for further investigation denied, permanently. Yet earlier this year, over 3 decades later, archaeologists uncovered traces of human beings in Siberia dating back 300,000 years, a date which suddenly makes Jean McIntyre's find not so improbable after all.
It's not necessarily a deliberate conspiracy in the sense of some people getting together in a smoke-filled room and saying, we're going to deceive people. It's something that happens automatically within the scientific community. So when a given piece of evidence disagrees with the predominant theory, then automatically people won't talk about it, they won't report it, and that means that science fails to progress in the way that one would hope.
Is science overlooking evidence of a past we have forgotten? Can the myths be true which tell us there was once a civilization on this planet which was lost thousands of years before recorded history began? A new brand of researchers is looking at precisely the anomalies science tends to discard. They ask questions which may change our views on the course of human history. The Inca fortress of Sacsayhuaman, of indeterminable age, and built by a people who had no hard metal tools or cement and knew neither pulley, wheel, nor crane.
And just look at this stone. I've counted 11 corners. This thing must weigh more than 200 family-sized cars, and it reveals the incredible craftsmanship of the people who built it. These things also reveal something else, an incredible ability to handle things of this size. How on earth did they get it up there?
Bolivia, the ancient mysterious ruins of Tiwanaku. Similar craftsmanship, advanced building capabilities which are unexplained.
The facing stones of this site are perfectly set with no mortar. We took a needle, and that needle we tried to insert at every point along the joint, and the needle couldn't be inserted. A perfect cut.
When the Spanish conquerors asked the Incas whether they'd built Tiwanaku, the Incas said, no, we didn't build it. It was built thousands of years before us. Now, the evidence shows it was built by an advanced civilization. And a chance discovery reveals just how advanced they may have been.
The building blocks of Tiwanaku aren't held together by cement. Whoever takes them apart discovers the unexpected glint of metal holding the stones together.
What I find amazing here is that to move to each site where the staple was needed, they had to have something like a portable smelting plant to maintain this metal in a molten state.
And here, a similar use of metal joints and stone finely jointed like this L shape here with the same ingenuity. Peru? No, we're a continent away, in Africa. Egypt, land of the pyramids.
The three pyramids of Giza, wonder of the ancient world. The triumph of another people who knew neither wheel, pulley nor crane. How were they able to haul 100-ton building blocks up so high? A feat modern technology can neither explain nor imitate.
I'm an engineer, and I can tell you that to raise blocks of this size to such heights requires a special crane. Now, for a people who did not have that sort of machines, not even the simplest pulley or the wheel, and using simple copper tools, how could they do this?
Beauval believes the Great Pyramid of Giza was much more than a tomb, and that it betrays an unexpectedly high level of technology. In their book, Keeper of Genesis, Robert Beauval and co-author Graham Hancock list many unexplained feats. Drilling expert Chris Dunn.
This is an incredible piece of work and a mystery. How did they do it?
The sarcophagus in the king's chamber. How did primitive builders make the inner contents match the contents of the stone sarcophagus itself down to the cubic millimeter? A feat requiring a sophisticated knowledge of physics. A mystery just like the actual drilling itself.
The typical way of doing it primitively would be with a bow saw, a bow drill, and they would advance the tool into the piece using sand or a diamond. And to me, that would just take too long, too many years to do this.
Well, how do you think they did it?
I think that they had to have used some power tool. Today, if we were to drill this, we would advance the drill into the granite at a rate of 2/10,000ths of an inch per revolution of the drill. They were advancing a lot faster than that.
Faster? Researchers such as Chris Dunn wonder about the purpose of this strange instrument on a hidden frieze. But power drills? That seems a rash conclusion. Yet traces of high-speed drilling present unsolved mysteries.
Now, just look at this. The incredible precision of workmanship, the total smoothness of these walls. In this tomb, which is intended for sacred bulls, and which testifies to the tremendous level of craftsmanship of these people. But of course, that could be explained in terms of 100 workmen polishing away for 10 years. But how about a real mystery? The mystery of the Egyptian vases. Not like this clay vase, which I've just bought, but vases of alabaster, basalt, even diorite, which is the hardest stone of all. Now, the mystery is this. It's easy enough to see how you could hollow it out by drilling straight down inside. But what about these pieces around the corners? Modern technology is unable to do it. And yet, the ancient Egyptians fashioned thousands of these things, some of them 2,000 years before civilization is supposed to have started here. How? The mystery is still unexplained.
Unexplained. How could the builders align their gigantic pyramids to the cardinal directions so impeccably? Perfectly east-west and perfectly north-south, with a precision unmatched by modern builders. The Great Pyramid seems to be a mathematical model of the Northern Hemisphere and incorporates the transcendental value of pi, the ratio of a sphere's diameter to its circumference, the basis of higher mathematics.
it's clear that what we have here is an advanced system of mathematics and technology at a time when this isn't supposed to have existed. And to achieve these results, the ancient builders had to use a slope of 52 degrees. Any other slope just wouldn't work.
But it was not only the Egyptians who knew pi. That transcendental value is also represented in the slope of this pyramid and the strange angle its builders gave them at Teotihuacan in Mexico, the city later generations of awed Indians would call the City of the Gods.
This city was once bigger than Imperial Rome. What you can see here are a series of basins that were once filled with water, whose smooth mirror-like surface reflected the heavens, and also whose ripples would serve as some kind of earthquake warning. These temples on the opposite side are believed to represent the heavenly bodies. This whole place seems to have a kind of obsession with astronomy and with eternity. On the equinoxes, on March the 21st and September the 21st, these pyramids cast a giant shadow straight along the axis, which made them the perfect clock for a people who were obsessed with the measurement of time and of precession.
As if tapping some common source, ancient civilizations around the world display sophisticated knowledge of the heavens, which has yet to be explained. A fascination for the sun and stars and for precession, the slow, relentless movement of the earth, which make the constellations seem to travel through the night skies and epochs.
Scholars say that the ancient Egyptians did not have a high knowledge of astronomy. But here is evidence of their fascination and sophisticated knowledge of the sky. Look at the zodiac constellations: Leo, Taurus, Pisces, and here the constellation of Orion.
Beauval believes astronomy is a key to the many mysteries of the pyramids of Giza. Ancient Egyptians saw the constellation of Orion as their god Osiris, lord of the dead, the night skies, and the afterlife. Beauval found the god in evidence all over the Giza pyramids.
This is the real mystery.
Small shafts leading upward, no more than ventilation shafts to Egyptologists, but astronomers thought differently. To ancient Egypt, this was Rostau, gateway to the netherworld, kingdom of the god Osiris, or Orion.
To the ancient Egyptian, Orion was Osiris, the high god of resurrection. Now, this is a reconstruction of the sky in 2500 BC, and I was amazed to discover this.
The shafts led up to Orion and the star Sirius, or Isis, consort of Osiris. In ancient texts, Beauval finds they must have served in a secret ceremony to make dead pharaohs resurrect as stars in the constellation of Orion.
One of these texts says, "May you traverse the winding waterway, the Milky Way, and may you go to the place where Orion is."
Beauval believes that Osiris had such crucial importance to the builders that they constructed the Giza pyramids precisely like the three stars in Orion's belt. Phenomenal as it sounds, that correlation was only the beginning. He found the ancients had given star names to two other contemporary pyramids nearby. He then looked at the wider plan and was staggered. The constellation of Orion, the god Osiris, lay in heaven as on earth. Mexico, where Teotihuacan presents another parallel.
Legend calls this the City of the Gods and suggests that its purpose was to transform human beings into heavenly beings. As in Egypt, with the pyramids of Giza, the myths speak of its meaning as reincarnation in the stars. That's the secret of Teotihuacan. But an even greater enigma lies in the pyramid up above me. When it was first excavated in 1906, they discovered an enormous sheet of mica. Now, we know that mica is used in electrical insulation, but we've no idea what they wanted to use it for. What makes it even stranger is that the mica came from Brazil. Imagine the problem of moving a 90-foot square sheet of mica 2,000 miles. How? And for what purpose? We've simply no idea.
Tiwanaku, Bolivia. Another lost culture betraying that same fascination with the sun and stars. 100 years ago, Bolivian archaeologist Poznański observed that on the first day of spring, the sun rose exactly through the center of the temple. It was the starting point of a remarkable discovery.
Poznański found they built this temple as an observatory, a huge clock to measure the progression of the sun. And we can use these astronomical alignments to date this site.
Throughout the year, the sun rises in a different spot on the horizon. On the first day of spring, an observer would see the sun rise exactly in the center. By studying the layout of the complex, Poznański deduced that on the first days of winter or summer, the sun would rise above the cornerstones. But it didn't. Archaeologists today say it's simply because the builders made an error in construction.
After observing the perfection with which this site is built, with 100-ton stones, to suggest that such things as the solstice markers are misaligned, I find incredible.
Neil Steed made a thorough check of Poznański's calculations. By measuring the angle of the cornerstones and comparing that angle with today's sunrise positions, Poznański was able to calculate that Tiwanaku was built 17,000 years ago. At that time, the tilt of the Earth's axis was slightly different than it is today. At that date, the summer and winter suns would have risen directly above the cornerstones.
I would suspect the date would be more like 12,000 years ago. But that should make each and every one of us fully question the origins of civilization.
Did a civilization lost in time leave its fingerprints in various places in the world? Egyptian priests told the Greek philosopher Plato of such a civilization which had existed 12,000 years ago. But according to science, mankind emerged from the Stone Age some 5,000 years ago. Could man have made that climb before? In Egypt, investigator John West found that the Sphinx of Giza wasn't weathered in the same way as its surroundings, eroded by sand and desert winds. Instead of horizontal weathering, the Sphinx shows rounded, undulating marks of erosion.
You don't even have to be a geologist to look at it and see what must have been responsible for that kind of weathering. Only water pouring in sheets over the enclosure wall could have produced those rounded contours.
Water? In the Sahara Desert? Certainly not in the times of the pharaohs. For that, you'd have to go back all the way to the end of the Ice Age, some 10,500 years BC, thousands of years before there were any pharaohs at all. But how is it then that the Sphinx has a pharaoh's head?
The head is disproportionately small. Seen especially from the air, you see that the body of the Sphinx is long and flattened out, and the head almost looks like a pinhead stuck on the top of it. This, to us, is an indication that the head has been recarved. In other words, at some point in its long history, the head was redone.
John West believes the Sphinx was originally a huge lion, which an unknown group of sculptors carved out of rock before 10,500 BC. It became eroded when the end of the Ice Age upset the climate and caused rains to pour down for many centuries. Only thousands of years later would pharaohs carve its head into their own image. The Sphinx, more than twice as old as was thought until now. The theory is ridiculed by Egyptologists, but geologists simply tell them the facts are there. Stranger still, according to Robert Bauval, astronomical evidence suggests that the pyramids of Giza all seem to point to that incredible old age. The layout of Giza matches uncannily with the position of Orion in the year 10,500 BC, a time when the Sphinx looked at Leo, its own image in the skies. When Orion started a slow ascent through the epochs, signaling a new era. The setting of Orion at that distant date even corresponds precisely with the three small pyramids behind the pyramids themselves. And there are many other bewildering facts astronomy provides.
And this matches exactly with the analysis of the Sphinx. So there are two hard sciences now indicating that the Sphinx could be going back to 10,500 BC.
Egypt experienced major and dramatic changes at the end of the Ice Age, particularly about 10,500 BC, when very high, exceptionally high floods covered the floodplain, and it ended things both in the Delta and the Nile Valley in general.
10,500 BC, a time of floods. Could the designers of Giza point back to that distant time? The time their myths say that the god Osiris and his helpers ascended from chaos to bring first fruits of civilization. Where did they come from? A god who was very similar was lord of ancient Tiwanaku in Bolivia.
Here in this mysterious city of Tiwanaku, the god they worshipped, tall, bearded, described as white. Viracocha emerged in times of chaos and destruction from across the waters to bring some kind of renewal to the human race.
The white god Viracocha. In Mexico, he's called Quetzalcoatl, who came with others to bring the first fruits of knowledge. His symbol is all over Teotihuacan.
The feathered serpent, symbol of the enigmatic god Quetzalcoatl, who came from the east after times of tremendous cataclysm to bring civilization to this part of the world.
Could gods like Osiris, Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl have been real people who came from afar? Survivors of a cataclysm that had destroyed their homes and civilization?
Now, the question we're asking is this. Was there some remote civilization, as yet unidentified, that touched Egypt, Mexico, and South America, and left its imprint, however difficult to discern, in a body of knowledge? Now, taken in isolation, I agree. Each bit of evidence reveals little, but let's consider all these common elements together.
Both sides had huge pyramids, precisely aligned to the cardinal points, incorporating sophisticated knowledge of mathematics. Both demonstrated an astounding knowledge of astronomy, expressed in the great sacred monuments they both erected. Although they knew neither pulley nor wheel, both could build using huge stones finely jointed, in a unique style of construction with L-shaped corners and metal clamps. And both cultures used the process of mummification to preserve and honor their dead. Here a new astounding clue was found when Dr. Balabanova of the German University of Ulm discovered to her surprise that many mummies from Egypt contained cocaine and nicotine, indigenous to South America.
Ich habe eine Reihe von Briefen bekommen, die fast gefährliche Briefe waren, beleidigende Briefe, dass das alles eine Unfug ist, dass das Fantasie ist, dass das absolut unmöglich ist. Es ist nachgewiesen, dass diese Pflanze vor Kolumbus nirgendwo in der ganzen Welt außer Amerika vorhanden waren.
But her research was repeated on hundreds of mummies and proved beyond refute. Did, in some distant past, seafarers indeed cross the seas and influence the cultures on both sides of the Atlantic? The thought is even suggested by what is not there: Mexico, the ancient culture of the Mayas.
The Mayan priests had tables for predicting the eclipses of the sun and the moon, yet there was something very odd about the Mayans. They never even grasped the simple principle of the wheel. They were able to visualize eternity as no previous civilization could, thinking in terms of millions of years, and yet they never learned to weigh a sack of grain. This sophisticated civilization finally died because they didn't develop the simple agricultural methods to feed their own people. Now, what I'm suggesting is it possible that they simply inherited a specific part of their knowledge from some much earlier and wiser civilization?
Contact. Sometimes the evidence is there for all to see. The ancient Olmecs in Mexico gave their rulers the face of an African.
And how about this, carved by these same Olmecs? It's genetically impossible for Indians to have beards, and yet you have this face of a white Caucasian male carved perhaps 2,000 years before the Spaniards first came to the New World. So, faces of Africans and Caucasians carved many centuries before Columbus. Where did they come from? How did they get here? How did they come to influence the most ancient culture of Central America, the mother culture of Mexico? All that archaeologists know is that they suddenly materialized, fully evolved about 1500 BC. No sign of a development phase. These people, whose characteristic expression was the carving of huge stone heads of Caucasian and Africans, seem to have come out of nowhere.
Oaxaca, the ancient citadel of Monte Alban.
Here, further to the south in Mexico, is what seems to be the last record of these mysterious men. But these figures carved in stone seem to represent men who've been slain in battle, naked, forlorn, most of them castrated. This may be the point where these men disappear from history. So, a sophisticated seafaring civilization that crossed the Atlantic centuries before Columbus. But there's another piece of evidence. There are old maps that suggest that ancient seafarers possessed a knowledge of the globe that's never been explained.
A puzzle for scientists throughout this century. In 1513, Turkish Admiral Piri Reis mapped out parts of the world no one had ever seen at the time.
Columbus only explored the areas of the Caribbean. He didn't get to South America. He didn't get down to this area of South America all the way down to Antarctica. He didn't get anywhere near this area. But these maps are showing all these features accurately well before Columbus or the European explorers have reached these areas. This map, which is centuries old, depicts the true configuration of Queen Maud's Land, which is now under nearly a kilometer of ice, and its true configuration wasn't determined until 1949.
Unexplained. Cartographers have long pondered the strange projection used. It was found to resemble the one a modern nuclear submarine uses, which measures the world as it moves away from the center where it prowls. In this case, its center lay in Syene, Egypt, home of ancient cartographers. The map only seems distorted, but it accurately shows this part of the world. And there's more.
To my mind, the most significant aspect of the Piri Reis map is the fact that it accurately depicts longitude, something that Europeans weren't capable of doing until the 18th century, but this is a 16th century map.
Longitude. That story began on these beaches in the year 1707, when the English fleet was sailing from the Mediterranean towards the coast of England. Now, in those days, it was quite easy to determine how far north or south you were by measuring the angle that the sun or the stars made of the Earth's surface. But there was no technology for determining how far east or west you were, longitude. Well, Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel was infuriated when a sailor from the West Country told him that he was about 20 miles too far east and was likely to wreck the fleet on the coast. When his officers assured him that the course was correct, he had the sailor hanged for insubordination. In his last dying moments, he must have wished that he hadn't.
Ships before had foundered in thousands, but now the loss of an entire fleet started the hunt for an accurate clock which would enable the calculation of longitude. It would take 2 more generations before it was finally developed. Yet the Piri-Reis map, made 250 years earlier, already shows knowledge of longitude.
On the Piri-Reis map is mentioned the fact that it's compiled from many other source maps. These are copies of copies of copies. Well, most of the people who've researched this believe that the maps went back to at least the time of Alexander the Great, but they are really much older than even that.
Maps of the world, drawn way before we learned to sail the oceans? Unexplained building technology? Sophisticated knowledge of mathematics, astronomy?
If there was such an advanced civilization capable of passing on its knowledge to the Sphinx builders, to the people of the Andes and Mexico, what happened to it? Well, Plato said that there was such a technologically advanced civilization able to sail the oceans of the world. Atlantis, lying on a huge island continent.
Rejecting a lost civilization, science equally rejects the notion of a worldwide catastrophe that destroyed it. But the accounts of Plato or the Bible do not stand alone.
The Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Mayans, speaks of huge tidal waves and floods, of skies that darken for months on end, of indescribable cold and black rain and hail. The ancient Egyptians talked of a time of chaos, floods and darkness, from which the gods emerged to shape the land of Egypt. The sun disk of the Aztec speaks of 4 cycles of destruction: by flood, by fire, by wind, and by blood and war, and foresees the end of the world by upheaval from the bowels of the earth. Myths from elsewhere in Asia and America speak of apocalyptic floods, of a deluge of fire from volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. They speak with a disturbing realism of a past that we can neither clearly remember nor entirely forget. Scholars are inclined to believe that the flood is the fantasy of ancient poets. But suppose the scholars are wrong. Suppose some series of terrible natural catastrophes did reduce our ancestors to small groups living far apart, scattered all over the world. What we're looking for is some epoch that fits the myths as snugly as the slipper fits Cinderella's foot.
A clue. The La Brea tar pit of California. Mass grave for over 1 million animals, now turned into a tourist attraction.
Well, deep below the surface here, you have the Salt Lake oil field. Asphalt seeps out through the cracks and fissures like a tremendous flypaper, and it catches animals in the asphalt. And we have incredible resources here from the animals that were trapped in this method during the last 40,000 years.
The tar pits read like a book of ancient times, when animals abounded which we never thought of as indigenous to America at all. Mammoths, elephants, rhinos, giant sloths, saber-toothed tigers, even horses and camels. Then a huge catastrophe wiped them out, apparently within a few decades. The time is around 10,500 BC, over 12,000 years ago.
The big animals, any mammal larger than a coyote, largely became extinct within a few tens of years. Yes, that is, in fact, a great catastrophe.
A record of catastrophe. The end of the Ice Age, 10,500 BC, over 12,000 years ago. Temperatures that had remained relatively stable for thousands of years suddenly shoot upwards. A staggering increase of over 5 degrees in the twinkling of an eye, a period of 3 to 10 years only. That is the amazing discovery of scientists who drilled into Greenland's ice cap to investigate changes in the atmosphere.
This Greenland ice core, some people have called it the Rosetta Stone of climate, because to be able to see that climate can shift so quickly was really a major find. And that change occurred over maybe 3 years to only a couple of decades, close to what we see today. We had found phenomenal changes in the chemistry of the ice. We found that during the period when the ice sheets were starting to melt away, that we have more signals of volcanic deposition and of greater magnitude, or greater concentrations than at any other time over the last 110,000 years that we've measured.
Unprecedented volcanic upheaval coupled with atmospheric turmoil and huge floods. For as ice sheets over a mile thick melted within decades, sea level shot up by 4,500 feet. Suddenly seas appeared where land had been.
You could walk from Great Britain to Scandinavia at a time when a climatic revolution shaped the North Sea. It was a time when great floods covered the plains of North America, so that the skeletons of whales are found in Michigan. A time of cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age, which may fit the myth. In the New World alone, about 70 kinds of animals became extinct. Saber-toothed cats, mammoths, giant sloths, horses, camels. Let me just put that in perspective. Over the previous 200,000 years, less than 1/3 of that number had become extinct. And that same extraordinary pattern of extinction was repeated over Europe and Asia.
In the permafrost of Siberia and Alaska, tangled masses of bones are found of millions of animals which perished in a cataclysm. The giant mammoth didn't fall victim to the hunters of prehistory. He was felled by natural catastrophe. At the turn of the century, Siberian hunters stumbled across the frozen skull of one huge animal. When it was dug out and transported, its stomach was found to contain undigested plants from a temperate climate. The animal had been deep frozen faster than any modern freezer is capable of.
What is certain is that some 12 or 13,000 years ago, a terrible cold descended on Siberia and hasn't relaxed its grip ever since. This riddle of the instant frozen mammoths has given way to some strange anecdotes, some true, some untrue, like the mammoth steak served in Fairbanks, Alaska. But what is certainly authentic is a report by the Russian 19th century naturalist Baron Wrangel, who discovered Bear Island, which is north of Siberia, and where the sand was literally held together by reefs of bones and tusks of mammoths and other animals that had disappeared in some strange primeval catastrophe. These mass extinctions, this tremendous volcanic activity, this rapidity of the melting of the ice seems to suggest some enormous climatic revolution that took place about 12,000 years ago. There seems to be some unknown factor that we can't put our fingers on.
The end of the Ice Age. What made it a revolution? Here's the big question. What brought on cataclysm?
One of the best theories that has been put forward is by an American, Charles Hapgood, who suggested something he called
earth crust displacement, which meant that the whole crust of the earth shifted around suddenly like the skin of an orange.
The whole outer shell of the earth, it's only 1/3 of 1% of the earth's mass. Like the a peel of an orange, if it was loose, it moves.
Thinner than an eggshell, the Earth's crust rests on a molten liquid interior. The ruling theory on the Earth's crust is that of plate tectonics, continents slowly drifting apart over hundreds of millions of years. Though science scorned the theory for over half a century, it now equally scorns the notion that the Earth's crust could move as a whole and suddenly. But one scientist was mesmerized by the idea. Had he lived longer, Earth crust displacement would have been considered more seriously. His name was Albert Einstein.
This is a summary of what he said. When I came across Hapgood's work, I was electrified. Here was an idea that was simple, but could explain a whole range of problems.
Hapgood had the theory. The question was, what was the mechanism that set this whole gigantic thing in motion? And it was Einstein who came up with the suggestion. The enormous amount of ice that builds up around the poles can become 2 miles thick, ice that extended right into the middle of the continent of America. And these billions, countless billion tons of ice, if they formed in an imbalanced way, would cause the Earth, as it were, to judder like a wheel with a great weight placed on its rim. This judder would in fact be sufficient to cause that switching of the crust of the Earth.
55,000 years ago, the North Pole lay close to Europe, but suddenly swept to Hudson Bay in Canada. And around 12,500 BC, it suddenly shifted again, almost 2,000 miles to where it lies now. Or is it better to say the lands and seas have been swept across the pole, propelled by a sudden displacement of the Earth's crust? If so, this is one of the things which would have happened at the end of the Ice Age. The displacement propelled America out of the polar zone. The sea to the north of it froze over with a thin sheet only meters thick. The huge old ice sheet over North America, more than a mile thick, suddenly melted in a matter of years.
Now, what's so interesting about the Hapgood-Einstein theory is that it also explains all kinds of other myths quite apart from the myths of flood. There are myths of tremendous earthquakes, volcanic catastrophes, black rain falling from the sky, sudden freeze-ups of whole lands. And you can see, then in point of fact, this is precisely what would happen if the Earth's crust switched around. Quite suddenly, areas that had previously been freezing would suddenly be switched into regions. Things like that flash-frozen mammoth of Siberia. Whole species would be wiped out.
If an Earth crust displacement caused the deluge that destroyed a civilization, where was that civilization? Searchers believe to have found it on the Greek island of Santorini, once destroyed in a huge eruption, or in ancient Troy. The German island of Heligoland almost washed away by the North Sea. They have searched for sunken continents in the Atlantic Ocean, but nothing has been found.
And it's this exact problem that scuppered Plato's Atlantis as an ocean for serious scholars. You see, oceanographers have mapped the floor of the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, and there's no lost continent. Or is there?
In Plato's account of Atlantis, he describes the island as a vast island continent with mountains in the middle of the real ocean. And the real ocean, of course, is the world ocean. It was only later that we began to divide the ocean up into different parts, calling it Atlantic and Pacific, etc. In reality, the world only has one ocean. The myths from around the world, some of them are very explicit about what happens in the Zen Vesta of the Vedic literature. The island continent is destroyed not only in a deluge, but it is covered in snow and ice. So we're looking for an ice-covered island in the middle of the ocean, and there is a great candidate in Antarctica.
If the North Pole shifted, so must the South Pole. Flemath believes that 12,000 years ago, part of Antarctica lay in temperate zones, and could have housed a civilization, lost when the continent was swept into the grip of the pole. It's the explanation he finds for maps which show parts of Antarctica as they lay under ice. Turkish Admiral Piri Reis demonstrates knowledge of Antarctica he shouldn't have had.
We have the cartographic departments of both the Navy and the Air Force saying we have made comparisons of the soundings of salient peaks and mountains. We found them to be in astonishing agreement.
What must be emphasized is that we're not talking about just one map, the Peri-Reis map, which could be argued away. We're talking about literally dozens of maps.
For example, the Phineas map of Antarctica is extremely accurate to the general configuration, showing river systems that do exist but weren't known in the 16th century.
We didn't discover Antarctica until around 1800. Yet how could European mapmakers already have charted it? Only, Flem Ath believes, if they copied it from copies upon copies of maps going back millennia. Information that simply shouldn't be there. It's only over the last 25 years we know that under the ice cap, Antarctica exists of some islands, a continent, a frozen sea in between. Yet the notion is already here on this map.
What I'm saying is that these islands here correspond to this area. And the snowfall pattern through here is very heavy. Virtually none through here. These, which are islands underneath of here, would join together before they joined the mainland. And so there was passage through here for several thousand years. There was probably passage through here that then these were joined. So what it's depicting here is something that I think actually did happen. 8,000 BC, maybe 6,000 BC at the latest. Yeah. We have no way of knowing how that came about except by postulating the existence of a civilization that had some sort of navigational and topographical skills that were only reinvented in our own time.
So, were the beginnings of human civilization more remote than we supposed? You may feel that many elements in this program amount to wild guesses which, taken in isolation, can all be argued away. What I'm suggesting is that if you put these pieces all together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, you begin to see the emergence of a pattern, like a shape emerging from the mist. A civilization that vanished and was forgotten long before recorded history began.